welcome to Friday's Live. Thanks so much for joining us today. We've got Liam in the comments, so do say hello. Let us know where you're tuning in from, how your week's been. See, we've already got Shirley over on YouTube saying hello from a rainy Cambridgeshire. And hello there, Gina. Welcome. For those of you, our regular viewers, you might notice that my background's a little bit different today. I actually moved house over the weekend, so apologies if it's a little echoey. This is the last room to get that TLC. So I see we've got more people joining. We've got Bob over on YouTube, Victoria, welcome Victoria, Tammy, Chris, welcome. So we've got a packed agenda here on this very windy today. Very windy today in London. I've moved to North London from South London, just across the river. It seems like soggy and rain is the theme. We've got Graham over on YouTube for a very rainy West Yorkshire. Roxanne nearly forgetting it was Friday. Happy Friday, everyone. Yeah. Got Daphne is wet in Somerset. Who else have we got? We've got Gillian from Winnipeg. Welcome. Ellen joining us from that's Gillian again. We've got Ellen joining us. Welcome everyone. So yeah, packed agenda today. Just to sort of a little teaser for later for the question of the week, which we will come back to later. So the question of the week this week will be, what is the most exciting discovery you have made at an archive? So I'll say that again. What is the most exciting discovery you have made at an archive? So that could be a physical archive, online archive, whatever you fancy, but we'll come back to that later. Meanwhile, coming up, we're going to take a look at some of our wonderful new records of the week. We're going to take a trip through the pages of one of my favourite newspapers, which is the Illustrated Police News. But before we dive into our new records of the week, we've got a quick shout out from Ellie. She'd like to know if you have unlocked any family secrets or any family mysteries through the 1921 census. So if yes, if you found some remarkable stories, you've solved some mysteries, broken down those brick walls, please do share your story with us. So I think Liam will share the link to the form where you can fill out your story and let us know, or you can email our email address at discoveries@findmypast.com. So make sure you've shared your stories with us by the 3rd of October, and you could be in with a chance of winning a 3-month pro subscription. So 3 months free. It's very exciting. And talking of money off, we've got a very special sale on at the moment. So that's 20% off selected packages with the code SAVE20. Great. So on to our new records of the week. So we've got something of a Norfolk theme this week, with new baptism, marriage, and banns and burial records joining us. So we've got some really fascinating records this week, as well as 3 brand new newspaper titles. So there's quite a lot for us to unpack today, so I won't dilly-dally. Do continue. Say where you're from as well. Let us know if you're just joining us. Just looking through. Oh, rain. Rain is the theme today, as well as Norfolk. Raining in Lancashire. Oh, well, thank you, Victoria. That's really kind. Settling in nicely. Thank you to my new home. Thank you. Okay, so we'll kick off with our new records of the week. With Norfolk baptisms. So these new baptism records are all from 1922. So we've got just under 4,000 of these joining our Norfolk baptism collection, meaning that we now have 3.6 million Norfolk baptism records in all. Now, our biggest baptism update of the week comes to the parish of St Margaret's with St Nicholas in Norwich. So that's 213 records that we've added there. And we've got updates also joining the parishes of Cromer, Great Snoring and Holt, amongst other parishes. And I just love the name, Great Snoring. I think it's very Miss Marple. And I chose to pull out a record from Great Snoring. And this is the baptism record for Henry Warren Smith. And by 1922, our baptism records give us some really lovely details. So we've got Henry's birth date, for instance, as well as his baptism date. So just over a month apart. We've got both of his parents' names, their first and middle names, as well as the occupation of his father, who was a railway clerk. So we have this info in the transcription on the left-hand side there. But this collection also features the original image of the record, which is just great. We love that. And checking the image, there's even more info for us to glean. We can see who performed the baptism, and we can see here that it looks like the chaplain and the rector had been sharing duties. And we also can discover where the family were living. So the Smith family were actually living in nearby Fakenham, not Great Snoring, where the baptism actually took place. There's quite a little interesting detail there. A reminder to always check that image. So have anybody got any Norfolk ancestors? Anya says, oh, possibly me. I need to go back and look into that branch in more depth. And Andrea's got some Norfolk ancestors there, the Gold Sphinx. What a wonderful name to research. That's a very interesting name. And Janet, ancestors from Norwich, 1780s to 1830s before they moved to London. Okay, so our next edition of the week are our Norfolk marriages and banns, and this time from the year 1938. Oh, and Gina has ancestors from Great Snoring and Little Snoring. Wonderful stuff. And I don't know about you, 1938 to me feels quite modern, probably because growing up I was so immersed in Agatha Christie novels that I did actually think I probably lived in the 1930s. And then I started out my past career by working on the 1939 register. Anyhow, we've got 4,436 new marriage records joining our collection, and 4,456 new banns records joining this collection, all from 1938. So with those figures that I've just reeled off, you'll notice that there are actually more banns records, which is interesting. So a couple might have had their banns called in the church that they were due to be married at, but also in their home parish if they were different. Or perhaps they didn't follow through with the wedding, or when they went somewhere else to be married. So some food for thought there. And the parish with the biggest update of these marriage and banns records this week is South Lynn All Saints. And other parishes to be updated include Lowestoft, Wells next the sea, Norwich and Rundle. So like the baptism set, these records contain the original image. And you'll see that by 1938, the marriage register looks a lot like a marriage certificate. And the detail again is wonderful. And this is from Wells next to the sea, a lovely place. Went on holiday there many years ago, but remember it being very nice. And this is the marriage of Frederick Timothy Howard and Dorothy Mary Bainbridge, who were married on the 2nd of April, 1938. So we can see their signatures as well as those of the witnesses of their marriage. We can see their professions. Frederick was a butcher, and we can see where they're from as well. So Wells was Dorothy's home parish, whilst Frederick came from Burnham Market. And an interesting little detail here, under the bride's father's name, the name is Henry Platten. We can also see Platten as one of the names of the witnesses there. And it's noted that he's Dorothy's stepfather. And I think that's quite special there. They've got that kind of relationship that her biological father wasn't put down, but her stepfather. So again, just so important to check that original image. So our final record set of the week is Norfolk burials. And we've added records from the year 1997 to our collection of Norfolk burials. So if you thought 1938 was recent, 1997 will seem incredibly modern. And like the two previous sets, these record transcripts have associated original images, like this one here. And this contains the record of Joan Kathleen Newson from the parish of Twyford, who passed away in her late 80s. And we learn the date of her death, the date of her burial, as well as her age and address. And again, there's further information to glean from this image. The vicar has made a little annotation to the when buried field, splitting it into two columns to signify burial or ashes. So we can learn here whether somebody was buried or cremated. And there's also some other annotations here too. For example, in the entries above Jones, we can see where the person died, whether at a specific hospital or nursing home, and even their previous address. So such a lot of information there. And oh my gosh, we've got all this way. We're 11, nearly 12 minutes in, and I haven't mentioned newspapers. Or maybe I did. I think I mentioned the Illustrated Police News, which we'll be talking about later. We've got three amazing new newspaper titles that are joining us this week. Just made a little collage here of them because there's some lovely front covers on these ones, and two of these newspapers have been scanned from the paper originals, with some editions being in colour. So that means we really get some really lovely images with these particular newspapers. And these two new titles this week, which, although they've been published in London, they have their focus on African affairs. So they are the African Telegraph and Gold Coast Mirror, and the African Times and Orient Review. So both these titles were published in the 1910s with the involvement of John Eldred Taylor, who was a journalist from Sierra Leone. And the African Times and Orient Review was edited by a Sudanese Egyptian journalist, actor, and political activist, as well as a playwright, very talented man called Dusay Muhammad Ali. And this newspaper came out of the Universal Races Conference, which was first held in London in 1911. Now, this conference demonstrated, amongst other things, how there was ample need, and I quote, for a pan-Oriental, pan-African journal at the seat of the British Empire. So this journal would represent the interests of those people living in British-controlled parts of Africa and Asia, promoting solidarity between African and Asian peoples, as well as educating the British public on the issues that such communities faced. So this journal was a really radical one. It was anti-imperialist, it faced racism and discrimination head-on. And indeed, the British establishment was so wary of it that it was actually banned during some of the First World War, for fear that it would spread discontent in the British colonies in Africa and Asia. And I mentioned John Eldred Taylor before. He edited our other new title of the week, which is the African Telegraph and Gold Coast Mirror. Now, this again was published in London, but it was sponsored in Accra, which is then part of the Gold Coast, which is now in Ghana, of course. And this title contains some really lavish illustrations and photographs and imparted a wide coverage of West African affairs. And finally, our third and final new newspaper title of the week is the East London News and Shipping Chronicle. And this is a fantastic London local title. It was published in Poplar in London's East End and is a wonderful survey of East End life. So it was founded in 1859 and it goes all the way up to the 1960s. It contains things like dock directories and shipping intelligence, and it's a real gem of a newspaper for those with ancestors in that area of London, or indeed those with an interest in shipping history. So, oh yes, and before we move on to the question of the week, which I promise we'll get to, I just wanted to highlight this really wonderful photograph that I found in the African Telegraph and Gold Coast Mirror from February 1919. Now, this is a picture of Cecilia Amadou Taylor, who was a nurse at the Endell Street Military Hospital during the First World War. And I looked in that other new newspaper this week, the African Times, and it mentions how Cecilia, the daughter of a lawyer, had come to London from Sierra Leone in 1913 and was studying music. But by 1919, she was working at the Endell Street Military Hospital, which has a fascinating history because it was run almost solely by women. It was set up by doctors Flora Murray and Louisa Garrett Anderson, with the suffragette motto of deeds, not words. So this was where Cecilia here worked. And in 1918, she met Queen Alexandra, with whom she spoke and told her intention to return to Sierra Leone and practice medicine there. And Cecilia was studying medicine at the time. So such an inspiring woman, and I'm so grateful to have uncovered her story and this wonderful photograph in the pages of our new newspapers. So speaking of inspiration, question of the week, and I can see some answers have been coming through already. So what is the most exciting discovery you have made at an archive? I'm going to dive right in. We've got over on YouTube, Stamping and Stitching, a relative notebook started in 1898 with his notes, postcards, etc. And best of all, his photo, the only photo I've ever seen of him. It was fantastic to get him to know him through the archive. I just think that is amazing when you find something of your ancestors that they've touched, they've written, that's something so tangible like that, that's been kept somewhere in an archive or a library. So that's really wonderful. We've got Sue Moon. Oh, sorry, sharing the wrong thing, clumsy. Sue Moon, finding a marriage certificate for my 3 times great-great-grandmother, which I didn't know happened and wasn't looking for, but solved a 10-year brick wall. I love it when it just happens, when it just when something just appears that you weren't expecting, and with the bonus of solving a brick wall. We love that. We love that. Else, looking to see Anya. Looking at poor Lord records in the Mitchell Library in Glasgow gave me information on my 4 times great-grandmother. It told me all about her children and whether they were married and where they lived. It told me that one of her daughters moved to Australia. It explained why I was unable to find her on the 1861 census in Glasgow. And this is what I find really useful about archives and these collections, and something that we'll touch on later is that it can provide those answers to questions that aren't quite readily available on the censuses. For example, you have that missing person, and you're able to find a reason behind that. They've gone. They're not in the country anymore. They're not in Glasgow. They are in Australia. Any more questions coming through? Ellen. Finding my grandfather's naturalization record and realizing he changed his name from Pellegrino to Amadeo. Didn't know why, but it made it easier to trace him. And this is, imagine, because how would you know otherwise? That finding someone's a surname change, that's going to be tricky to find without perhaps taking a trip to an archive. And Kim Billy, the marriage record of my direct paternal 9th great-grandparents in 1674 in the town I live in now. Oh wow, that is way back. I just love that. We're going way back, and to be in that same town, to have those connections, so very special. So do keep your answers coming through. Oh wow, Daphne. Battle plans of the Battle of Waterloo and the Map River Queue, the smell of them was so special. And indeed, it's not the discoveries that you can make at an archive aren't limited to solely those about your ancestor. It could be that really rich contextual information. So battle maps, or indeed, I found really useful going to look at historic maps. So where in the house that I grew up, sort of seeing how that landscape changed when it was built. So maps are a wonderful thing to be able to check out at an archive. So yeah, do keep your answers coming through. And you'll understand why I've asked this question now today, as we'd like to take a look today at how you can use Find My Past as a springboard for further research at the archives. So this relationship is a really special one between Find My Past and archives. Many of our records, of course, come from our archive partners, but you can use Find My Past to dig deeper into collections at archives that may have not yet been digitised. So it's a very homogenous relationship, with Find My Past helping to inform archive research and vice versa. So I'd like to take a look at that today, and mainly focusing on our wonderful partners, the National Archives, who are based at Kew, using a little discovery I made from their collection, which I've been dying to share with you all. I can see some more answers are coming through. So we've got Bev. Bev found a newspaper advert for a musical event featuring my great-grandmother and my great-grandfather in 1898. I think this is how she met. She played the mandolin, and he was listed as a French fantasist. Ooh. I love that. The story of romance. That's brilliant. And again, that sort of contextual information, sort of fleshing out that those marriage records, what happened, how did they meet? Wonderful. And we've got Ruth, who's over on YouTube. She says, found the medical records for my husband's grandmother who died in 1914. A story was built up around her death to conceal the true cause of her death, and the records solved a mystery. Again, sort of shedding more light on those family stories, and something I'm going to delve into a little bit now. And Janet has a similar story of her husband's grandfather lied about many things, listing Ireland as a New Hampshire, USA as his place of birth. And he also wrote that his first marriage wasn't. Second wife was born in 1881, according to British records, but she emigrated to America after she married. And all the records after that list 1886 as her year of birth. This sounds very similar to my own grandfather, who, he was a bit of a ne'er-do-well, and he lied about many things, including his age, but then also his bride, my grandmother, also lied about her age. So I think all's fair in love and war. So yes, looking at archives and how you can use Find My Past as a springboard into further research, I'm going to introduce you to some of a branch of my family who lived in Dover in Kent in the first part of the 1800s. So my 4 times great-grandmother, I think we mentioned earlier another 4 times, somebody else's 4 times great-grandmother. One of mine was a woman named Rosina Sarah Welch, and she was born in 1809, and she married Henry O'Callaghan in 1827 in Dover. And you can see their marriage record here, thanks to our wonderful collection of Kent marriages. And both newlyweds sign their names, and this is something we'll come back to later. So the next record I'd like to show you is from the 1841 census. So this shows Rosina Callaghan and 2 of her children, Stephen and Mary, and they're all inmates at the Dover Union Workhouse. So where is Henry, first and foremost, her husband, and what has happened in those 14 years between the marriage and her now being in the workhouse? So this is where our friends at the National Archives came in. So thanks to Find My Past, first and foremost, I was able to trace my family back to Rosina and find her marriage record and find her in the 1841 census. And this was a line of my family that I knew very little about. That there were rumours about this branch, some Irish connection, some seafaring connection. So we got that through okay. Henry O'Callaghan was a sailor. But I still had questions, and this is when I turned to the National Archives and their Discovery Catalogue, and I think Liam has the link for that, which he will kindly share. And I searched for my ancestor, Rosina Sarah Callaghan, and the search brought up her name and the name of my own 3 times great-grandmother, her daughter, Anne Elizabeth Callaghan. So It turned out that the National Archives actually held the record of my ancestor, Anne Elizabeth, and her brother's Stephen's application to the Greenwich Hospital School. So, Greenwich Hospital was founded in 1712 as a charitable institution for the aged, infirm, or young, and its school was established to provide children from seafaring backgrounds with an education. So the penny really dropped here. I had found out that Rosina's husband Henry was a sailor, an able seaman in the Royal Navy, and he seemed to have disappeared from the records, not being present in the 1841 census. So looking at this entry in the Discovery Catalogue, you can find out that it hasn't been digitised. But that's not the end of the story. I could request for our lovely friends at the National Archives to have a look at the document, check for the names, so check to see that Anne Elizabeth Callahan and Rosina's names were all there, and then have it scanned and sent to me. So I waited with bated breath to find out more about Rosina, Anne, Henry, and Stephen, and I really wasn't disappointed. So in all, I received about 15 images from this file, which is held in Kew. And the documents were all relating to Stephen Callahan's entry to the Greenwich Hospital School, his sister Anne having been admitted there previously. And this is exactly what this document is here, is a form of application to the school. So it lists Anne's and Stephen's names, and fascinatingly, for me, stating the fact of their father Henry's death. It says, you can't really see it, died Plymouth on this document. And it also lists the names of the ships upon which he served, including Turner's famous Temeraire, which was scrapped very soon after Henry left the ship. And there's a comment in the bottom right-hand corner here, which reads, "These are to certify that Stephen Henry Callahan, son of Henry Callahan, by Rosina Sarah, his wife of this parish, is a real object of charity." So this is extremely profound. And again, Rosina signs this document, like she had her marriage document, tracing her signature down the years in very tragically different circumstances. So also included in the bundle of documents were the lists of ships upon which Henry Callahan has served. On the left is this one. It shows a list which was produced by the Admiralty on the 24th of July, 1840, charting Henry's naval service from his time on HMS Ramillies, which was from 1825 onwards. This was 2 years before his marriage to Rosina, all the way through serving on HMS Childers, Salamander, Medea, Temeraire, Ocean, Pluto, and finally, Tremendous. But this is actually the same list of service that can be found on Findmypast in our Royal Navy pension records, which is series ADM 29, which we've digitised from the National Archives. And curiously, on the entry to be found on Findmypast, the last two entries for HMS Royal Adelaide and HMS Tremendous, Henry Callahan is listed as not found, having been on HMS Astoria previously for only 1 week, the last record of him actually being on the 6th of April, 1839. So this fact has always made me very curious. What happened to Henry? Of course, the logical conclusion was that Henry had died. And I found on Findmypast a death record from the third quarter of 1839 for Henry Callahan. However, like death records from this time, there was no age given. And due to the various spellings of the name, Callahan, I've seen O'Callahan, O'Callaghan, Callahan without the G, Callahan with the G, I wasn't so sure. And the death was recorded in East Stonehouse, which is in Devon. I knew that Henry had ties to Kent, but not necessarily Devon, so I couldn't be 100% sure that the death information on the left referred to him. But amongst the documents I received from the National Archives was this letter, which was written by Rosina herself on the 12th of December, 1840. And she is writing here to the clerk of the Czech Greenwich Hospital as part of her son's application. And she writes how Mr. Henry Callahan died on the 29th of July, 1839 in Plymouth Hospital. So Henry had died. And a quick Google Map. Google Maps is always open in a tab. I always like to see where my ancestors were in Street View. But a quick Google Map of East Stonehouse, where from this death record, takes me to the former Royal Navy site, now in modern-day Plymouth. So Findmypast had brought me Henry's record, and with the National Archives, I could confirm it. But what about Rosina and her children after Henry's death? Their youngest son, Thomas George, had passed away in 1838, but Anne, Mary, and Stephen had all survived. And we get this incredible insight into Rosina's state of mind through her letters that survive thanks to the TNA at the National Archives. And I know some of you have been lucky enough to discover ancestors' writings and notebooks in archives. So this feeling is absolutely extraordinary to find something like this, giving me the immense privilege of reading my ancestors' words, despite the fact that she was nobody important and she lived in one of the poorest parts of Dover. Is profoundly moving. And Linda writes nice handwriting on this one. And yeah, I was really surprised by this because I'd always thought, because Rosina was someone who'd been in the workhouse, that she wasn't necessarily somebody who would be literate, although of course she signed her marriage or that educated. But these letters really show that she was. And Google Maps as well, Anya. I do this too. I love Google Maps. I love using them to plot where my family were. And I've been doing that. That's my pet project at the moment, plotting. I just love to see sort of the spread of where everybody's from. So this letter, I would just read it out because it's quite something, and it's not punctuated. So this whole thing is, there's no punctuation in here at all. So I've had to kind of add that in. It says, with humble subscription, I beg leave to acquaint you that my son, Stephen Callaghan, aged 10 years last August, has been nominated for the Royal Hospital School at Greenwich. That the required certificates have been transmitted, and I presume are before the board. I now, being very dangerously ill, could an order be sent for his admission. It would be a great comfort and easement to my mind on my deathbed, and I should die contented did I but know that my poor fatherless boy was received into the school of the Royal Hospital, and in those consoling ideas, respectfully, with all due difference, subscribe myself, your most humble and obliged servant, Rosina Sarah Callaghan, widow of the late Henry Callaghan. So it's a really moving letter. She paints a piteous picture of her own health, but arguing again for her son. And again, we get those little clues. I think Liam pointed out the joys of researching those Irish surnames. Rosina herself spells the surname Callaghan without an H. So it's all fun and games for us family history historians. And there was another letter from Rosina too, included in this bundle. This was from 2 years later, and she hadn't passed away as she had feared. This is from the 29th of April, 1842. And still her son Stephen hadn't been given entry to the Greenwich Hospital School. And again, she tells us here how she's been in very ill health. She outlines how her husband Henry had served 17 years in the Navy, and she was hopeful that her son Stephen would follow in his footsteps. And she ends her letter by writing, "I'm hoping you will grant me this request to receive my son as soon as possible, for I fear I shall soon be called to leave them and wish to do all in my power for their future welfare." So again, it's another desperate plea from her own pen. And again, from somebody I had assumed who didn't have any education. And these letters are so articulate, they're so loving. It gives me goosebumps. These letters from 180 years ago, written by my 4 times great grandmother. I feel really proud to have descended from such a strong and articulate woman. And yeah, I know Victoria, how wonderful is how that all those information and letters too. So do check your local archives, the National Archives, and you might be surprised, pleasantly surprised by what you can find. So it wasn't obvious from the records I received whether or not Stephen did actually get into the school or not. My own 3 times great grandmother Anne did, and she ended up marrying, and she moved with her husband and their children to Southall in West London. And sadly, all Rosina's fears of mortality would come to tragic fruition in October 1844, 2 years after she had written the letter pleading for her son to be admitted to the hospital school. And we find her burial record in Findmypast's collection of Kent parish registers. Her name is given and her age, and she was only 36 when she died. And I was curious to know what she had died from, given these claims to ill health that we can find in her letters. And through the GRO, the Government Repository of Indexes, I was able to order her death certificate. Her date of death is given as the 8th of October 1844, and her rank or profession as widow of Henry Callahan, brackets mariner. So even in her death, years after Henry's own death, she is still tied to her husband Henry. And her cause of death? Disease of the heart. It is almost like she was heartbroken at losing him. And now for something completely different, in case you might have missed this one, I'd like to introduce you to one of my favourite newspapers in our collection. And you can find individual newspapers, by going to our newspaper and periodical page and choosing filter by newspaper option on the left-hand side. And this particular newspaper was known as the worst newspaper in England, and it is the Illustrated Police News. And I think Liam has the link for it in case you'd like to go and have a browse of it. And this was an early illustrated tabloid title, and it was founded in 1864. It was a sort of descendant of the execution broadsheets of the 18th century. And it was famed for its graphic and lurid descriptions and illustrations of crimes, murders, executions, and general strange happenings, really, for 7 decades until 1938. So it's a really excellent resource for those interested in crime and true crime history. And I love that, Liam, the worst newspaper in England, but one of the best on Findmypast. I'm taking that for future use. Amazing. And it became particularly infamous for its depiction of the crimes of Jack the Ripper. So hugely graphic, very sensationalist, hence its description of the worst newspaper in England. So just to give you a broad flavour of this newspaper, this illustration hit its front page on the 5th of August, 1899. And it shows a peeping Tom who was discovered in a lady's swimming bath. And the caption explains how the fair swimmers captured him and threw him in. And there's just such a lot of detail in this illustration. All these ladies looking down from the balcony and peeping out from the changing rooms. And it's chaotic and just, absolutely what the Illustrated Police News is all about. Slightly more graphic illustration coming up. Look away, nervous if you're of a nervous disposition. So this is from September 1895, and it shows a terrible death in a lion's cage. And the somewhat unfortunately named Léon Essiette, he was a station reporter from France. He wanted a photo with the lions who were performing in a show near the railway station where he worked. So what he did, he snuck in the morning, early in the morning with a photographer, and Léon got into the cage of Romulus the lion and swiftly met his very unfortunate fate. But how can the Illustrated Police News help with genealogical research, and how can it tie in with our other records to be found in Findmypast? So it's a wonderful companion to our crime records, first and foremost. And these 2 particular snippets up here, they come from our National Archives series, CRIM 9 or CRIM 9. And CRIM 9 are records from the Central Criminal Court. They are the after-trial calendars of prisoners. So basically, these give details of prisoners from each calendar trial or session. So You get the names, the details of their crimes. So these two particular records here are from 1867 and relate to Frederick Arthur Watkins, a 23-year-old watchmaker from Essex. Now, the first of these is dated on the 10th of June 1867 and details his crime, which was, and I quote, feloniously wounding and causing grievous bodily harm to Matilda Griggs with the intent to kill and murder her. So Frederick Watkins was remanded to the next session, and the extract from the below record tells us the jury's eventual verdict on his crime and lets us know the sentence that was passed upon him. So the jury found Frederick guilty of his crimes, and he was sentenced to 20 years penal servitude. And thanks to the Illustrated Police News, we actually have an illustration of this crime, albeit a highly stylized, imagined scene, of course. And this was captioned, frightful tragedy at Buckhurst Hill, desperate attempt to murder a young woman. So this shows Frederick Watkins' attempt on young Matilda Griggs' life, and she was only 17 when this happened to her. But what had happened to provoke such a terrible attack? And here, the Illustrated Police News is really useful in fleshing out those details to give us a motive and describing what actually happened that day, as well as providing this interpretive illustration of it. So the Illustrated Police News, as well as containing illustrations of crimes and various happenings, actually goes into detail. It will say a headline and our illustrations, and it will give detail about whatever case is depicted. And the detail for this particular crime is incredible. And it could probably be a whole Findmypast from Home episode. And sadly, I don't have time to go through all the ins and outs. But basically, on the 24th of April, 1867, at about 5 p.m., a young man entered Epping police station. He was about 5'6". He was young and gentlemanly looking, of fair complexion. And he tells the policeman, the police officers, I have stabbed a woman at Buckhurst Hill. So he had confessed. And this gentleman was later revealed to be Frederick Watkins, who was the son of a watchmaker. And Frederick was following in his father's footsteps, working at a shop in Covent Garden. And his father had bought some land at Buckhurst Hill in Essex, so hence this tie to this particular area. So following Frederick's confession at Epping police station, the police rushed to the scene and they found Matilda there, whose clothes were drenched in blood. It was thought that she had suffered from 13 stab wounds in total, but remarkably, the 17-year-old girl had survived the attack. But what had provoked Frederick to act in such a way? So it was believed that he had met Matilda some 2 years before, and 12 months later he had seduced her. He wanted to hide her from his friends, who were stated to be wealthy. And she had even given birth to his child 4 months before, and he was stated to be very jealous of her. And on top of this, he had had some quarrel with her about his family. So it was a combination of these factors which saw him attack Matilda, whom he called Tilly, leaving her for dead. Not a very nice chap. So Frederick was tried and was found guilty of the attacks, as our crime collection tells us. And then we can actually trace his journey through the justice system using our collection of crime records. So these are quite small, I will explain. So on the top left is Frederick Alexander Watkins' record from Pentonville Prison, which is in Islington in London, and we can see his prison number there, 4765. And a further item relating to Frederick can be seen below. And this comes from series H013, which incorporates correspondence from regarding prisoners, and warrants. And this correspondence notes the request from Frederick's father to see his son in Pentonville Prison. And this request had been directed to the Secretary of State. And the Secretary of State had refused, instead directing Mr. Watkins to petition the directors of convict prisons at number 45 Parliament Street. And the final record, which is perhaps the most fascinating of all, and I've in Frederick's case, and I've sort of split this in two on the right-hand side, is also again from our crime collection, and it comprises a list of male prisoners who were held at Pentonville, which we know is where Frederick was incarcerated. His name is listed alongside his prison number, his marital status, single, his former trade. We also learn a bit about his ability at reading and writing, and he writes and reads well, the register tells us. And again, we get the details of his crime and his conviction. He's also judged as having a good character, having previously come from Newgate Prison to Pentonville. But we also learn where he went to after Pentonville. And it tells us, this record, that on the 30th of September, 1867, he was removed to Western Australia per ship Hougoumont. And I did a double take here. Surely 1867 was around about the time that transportation to Australia stopped? Well, on the 9th of January, 1868, the last convict ship to leave Britain arrived in Fremantle, Western Australia. So, Frederick Alexander Watkins may well have been one of the last convicts transported to Australia. But what of Matilda Griggs, his victim? It's really important to remember her and her place in history. It seems that her attacker, Frederick, paid for his crimes, but what happened to her? And she survived those horrendous injuries. And I found this particular marriage entry from our Essex Marriages collection from the 8th of February 1872 from Springfield, Essex, which I think is just outside of Chelmsford. And it says Matilda Griggs marries Henry Thomas. And I do really hope this is her. This is more for me to dig into, to another rabbit hole to go down. So I do really hope that she had found some happiness after all that she endured. So just looking at the comments there. Oh, Gina, hoping that they mention a police officer's names so I can find more information on police ancestors. Yes, and there's a really interesting tip, actually, that Jen shared recently, that police officers in Victorian area were often referred to by their numbers. So I think the National Archives actually has a list of these numbers that you can work out who your ancestor is and their number, and then search for those numbers within the newspaper collection. That's a really good tip there. Oh, and Janet, we've got some connections. That was the ship which my ancestors emigrated on in 1871. Oh, amazing. We've got some ties here. Yeah, beat me to it, yes. But yeah, triggered me, and we learned that very useful tip from Jen very recently about police officers. It's really, really fascinating, because you are reading a report and it will say Officer M23 attended the scene, and that's great, and he's got a lot to say, but who is M23? So using that list from the National Archives, you can discover who that was. Wow, thank you all very much for joining me today. It's so windy that I actually blew my window open halfway through, so I hope we weren't too disturbed by that. And I hope you all have a lovely weekend. Hope the weather improves if you've got rain. And thanks so much for joining us, and we'll be back again soon. Take care. Goodbye.